A small plane is flying a grid over a town, 450 meters up. It is not taking pictures. It is listening to the wire that runs into your house. Because the frequencies sealed inside that wire are the ones aircraft navigate by. There is a legal ceiling on how loud a whole town is allowed to be on them. Cross it, and an operator can be ordered off those frequencies in a day. In March 2006, one was. 4 leaks. One of them 70 times the limit. The rule that keeps them in, the number that decides it, the town that failed it, and the last thing standing in between. The cable that runs into your house is legally forbidden from talking to aeroplanes. Not forbidden from carrying the frequencies aeroplanes use. It carries them all the time, on purpose. Forbidden from letting them out. And before the exciting version of that gets away from me, the honest one. The flight is not compulsory. It does not happen over every town every year. There is a second test, done from the ground. It is cheaper, and plenty of operators use that instead. What is true is narrower, and I think stranger. The option is real. It is written into the regulation. The regulation specifies the altitude. Here is the overlap that makes any of it a rule instead of a curiosity. 2 stretches of radio spectrum, 108 to 137 MHz and 225 to 400 MHz. In the open air above your street, those numbers are aviation. That is where navigation beacons sit, where instrument landing systems sit, where controllers talk to cockpits. Inside the coaxial cable stapled to the side of your house, those exact same numbers are television channels and internet data. The two are not related. They just happen to occupy the same piece of the radio dial, one sealed inside a copper wire, one out in the open sky a few hundred feet apart. So federal law, 47 CFR 76.611, says a cable system may not operate in those bands unless it satisfies one of exactly 2 performance tests. One of those tests, written into the regulation, is this. Fly an aircraft over the community at 450 meters above the average terrain, about 1,476 feet, carrying a calibrated antenna and a receiver, and demonstrate that the radio field coming off that town stays under 10 microvolts per meter. Somewhere, on a schedule, a small aircraft is flying a grid over a town, listening for a wire. 3 things about that I could not answer when I started. How does a sealed copper wire start broadcasting at all? Why is the number for a whole town one number? And when the plane finds something, what has it actually found? A coaxial cable is 4 things stacked around each other. A solid copper conductor in the middle, carrying the signal. A foam layer called the dielectric around that, holding the spacing constant. Then a braided metal shield, usually with foil under it. Then the black jacket, the only layer you have ever seen. Only one of those matters here, and it is not the copper in the middle. It is the braid. The braid is not insulation in the usual sense. It is a wall against radio. The signal is trapped between the center conductor and that shield, and the shield's whole job is to keep the outside out and the inside in. Get that right, and you can run several hundred megahertz of aviation band radio down a residential street all day, and nothing outside the wire ever knows. Get it wrong, and the wire starts transmitting. That is the part that took me a minute to picture. A break in a coax does not stop the signal. The signal keeps going. The gap becomes an antenna. A cracked jacket that let water in and corroded the braid underneath. A connector somebody finger tightened instead of torqued. A splitter a tenant bought at a hardware store and screwed on behind a television in 2011. A squirrel. Any one of those, and a fraction of the energy inside stops being contained and starts radiating into the neighborhood on the same frequency it had inside the wire, which is to say, on an aviation frequency. The industry has a clean, boring word for that. Egress, signal getting out. There is a matching word for the other direction because a hole works both ways. Ingress, signal getting in. That one gives the company a selfish reason to care, beyond the law, in a decade when almost nobody watches cable television. The outside world now includes LTE. Cellular energy bleeds into the plant, lands on the frequencies the system uses to carry data upstream from homes, and collides with it. A bad fitting 4 houses down can show up as your internet being slow. One sideways note, because I know where some of you just went. This is not the British television detector van. That story is about hunting people who had not paid a license fee. This is close to the opposite. Here, the company that owns the wire is the one required to go looking, at its own expense, and what it is hunting is its own equipment failing. Nobody in this story is looking for you. There is no accusation at the end of it. There is a work order. Now the part that turns a rule into a system. If this were only about individual leaks, you would set a limit per leak and be finished. And there is one. 20 microvolts per meter, measured 3 meters from the wire, slightly tighter if the signal is digital. But one leak is not really the risk. 1,000 of them scattered across a town, all in the same band, all adding into the same air at once, is a different object. Not a point source, a haze over a city, on the frequencies aircraft navigate by. So the rule does something unusual. It does not just cap the leak, it caps the sum. The measurement is called the Cumulative Leakage Index, CLI. It expresses the total leakage of an entire cable system as one number, 10 times the base 10 logarithm of a quantity the regulation calls I sub infinity, and the answer has to come out at 64 or lower. 64 is not a percentage, it is a line. A whole system either sits under it or it does not. 2 obligations hang off that line. The first is quarterly. Roughly every 3 months, the operator has to sweep substantially its entire plant, find the leaks at or above threshold, and repair them. That is the van, a technician driving a residential street slowly with a receiver on the roof, watching a level climb, then walking the last part with a handheld sniffer until the reading peaks at one pole or one wall plate. The hardware is real. Viavi's Seeker X and Seeker HL, Arcom Digital's QAM snare, which its maker told the FCC can pick up digital leakage down to 0.13 microvolts per meter at 100 MHz. The second obligation is annual, and it is the proof. Once every 12 months, the operator has to show the whole system sits under the line by one of 2 methods. From the ground, sample at least 75% of the cable strand and show the index comes out at 64 or below. Or from the air, the flight I opened with, plus the specification I left out. Calibrated against a known reference field before the aircraft leaves the ground, an aeronautical receiver meeting the RTCA standard, and 90% of the recorded points under 10 microvolts per meter. The flight only becomes mandatory if the ground sample cannot reasonably be obtained. Otherwise, it is a choice between 2 equally legal paths. Now, the thing I have to be careful about, because the version that travels well online is not quite true. A plane at 1,400 feet cannot find your house. It is not that kind of instrument. From up there, the receiver reads a field across an area and produces a map with warm regions on it, a district, a few blocks, a corridor along a trunk line. It says the total is too high and roughly where. Finding the actual cracked fitting is the van's job. The plane hears the town, the van hears the address. And then somebody fills out a form. FCC Form 320, the Basic Signal Leakage Performance Report, filed every 12 months through the agency's licensing system. I had it in my head that this filing was killed off years ago. It was not. The FCC's 2017 modernization order retired one of 2 old ways of calculating the index, a method used in only 2.3% of 32,500 historical filings. The report itself survived, and companies have been trying to get out of it for as long as it has existed. Back in 2002, the Commission dismissed a stack of petitions, from Armstrong, from Optimum's parent, from Comcast, all asking to be let out of filing for every community they serve. The answer was no. The form is still there. March 28, 2006. Holly, Colorado, out on the Eastern Plains. An FCC Enforcement Bureau field agent is measuring the local cable system, operated by a company called Champion Cable. He finds 4 leaks, all 4 on 121.2625 MHz, inside the air traffic control band. The limit is 20 microvolts per meter. The smallest measures 385. The largest measures 1,428. Roughly 70 times the limit, out of 1 point on 1 wire. Add it all into the index, and the system's CLI comes out at 64.8. The ceiling is 64. He comes back the next day and measures again. It has gotten worse overnight. 67.2. What the FCC issued was not a fine, not yet. It was a shutdown order. Champion had to take its entire critical bands operation off the air, everything from 108 to 137 and 225 to 400, until the plant was repaired. It complied that same day, was re-inspected, and was found compliant. The money came afterward. An $8,000 notice of apparent liability, settled by consent decree for a $1,000 payment to the Treasury, and a 2-year compliance plan. The whole document is public. It is 4 leaks, a small town, and $1,000, which is roughly where I got stuck. Off the air in a day, and then $1,000. Which one of those is the punishment? If the plane only ever hears a town, who was actually at risk that morning? And if the answer is nobody, what is all of this for? Start with who it lands on, because it is not who you would guess. It is easy to assume this is a Comcast problem. It mostly is not. The FCC's own 2017 record counted roughly 1,076 cable operators in the country, and all but about 10 qualified as small businesses under the agency's own standard. And it is not only cable companies. Apartment buildings, hotels, hospitals, and university campuses running their own coax fall under the same rules if they use those frequencies. Small systems get relief from some record keeping. They do not get relief from the limits. So this sits on a lot of very small operations with a handful of trucks, and Champion is not the exception in that story. It is the shape of it. Now the caveat, and it is a real one. I went looking for the disaster, the case where a cable leak actually put an aircraft in trouble, because that is the story this whole rule implies. I did not find one. What I found was a regulation built around a risk, enforced against people who mostly were not hurting anyone on the day they got caught, priced accordingly. Which does not make it silly. Blanket interference across a town's worth of aeronautical spectrum is exactly the thing you regulate before it has a body count instead of after. But it does mean this system's success is indistinguishable from nothing ever happening. One more layer, and this one is written into its own section of the rules, outside the CLI arithmetic entirely. A short list of frequencies gets near zero tolerance. No cable system at or above 10 microwatts within 100 kHz of 121.5 MHz, the international emergency frequency. Within 50 kHz of 156.8 and 243.0, the maritime and military distress channels, same thing. Now go back and look at the frequency those Holly leaks were sitting on, 121.2625. The emergency frequency is 121.5. Those two numbers are 1/4 of a megahertz apart. For the record, that puts the leaks outside the special protected window the rule draws, and I want to say that plainly. Champion's problem was strength, not neighborhood. But stand the two numbers next to each other, and you understand why the neighborhood has a fence. There is one clean way out of all of this, and it may be what you are about to tell me. Fiber. A true fiber to the premises system carries light down glass instead of radio down copper, and light cannot leak into an aviation band. The FCC said exactly that, and exempted all fiber builds from the notification trigger. If glass runs the whole way to your wall, you are out of this story. For most people it does not. The dominant residential architecture is hybrid fiber coax, exactly what it sounds like. Fiber for the long haul, a node in your neighborhood, then coaxial copper for the last stretch into the house. That last stretch is radio. That last stretch is in scope. You can have cancelled television years ago, own no cable box, watch everything through apps, and still sit at the end of a wire that is legally required to keep aviation frequencies inside itself. So think about what the annual proof actually proves. It is not a certificate that your house is fine. Nobody measured your house. The index is a sum has terms, and your service drop is one term in it alongside every other house on the system. What an operator demonstrates is that the total came in under 64. Not that every wire is intact, that the total was acceptable. The plane never hears you. It hears everybody at once and reports one number, which leaves the last line of defense somewhere much less impressive than an aircraft. It is the braid. A few grams of woven metal inside a black jacket, running from a pole to a wall plate behind your television, held closed by a connector somebody tightened by hand, once, maybe a decade ago, maybe correctly. That connector is the reason the sky over your street is quiet, and that is the strange shape of this whole apparatus. The quarterly van, the calibrated antenna, the aircraft at 450 meters, the form every 12 months, the number 64. All of it exists to produce a negative result, so run it back. The plane heard a town and reported one number. Whose number was that? The form said the total was acceptable. Acceptable to whom, and measured on which day? And the braid behind your television, the one nobody has looked at in a decade. Which of those two answers is it currently sitting inside? The cable in your wall is talking. It has been talking this entire time. Everything you just watched is the machinery of making sure nobody up there can hear it, not the machinery of making it stop.